This is George Buckley from Bonaire, where I'm working on environmental projects and films. I'm inviting you to my Sustainable Ocean Environments class at Harvard University Extension School the spring semester. I'm holding here a large brain coral that's been washed up. Probably weighs about 10 pounds. The power of the oceans is phenomenally strong. And this coral probably was growing for 25 or 50 years, and a coastal storm washed it up upon the shore and bleached it out. But you can see here the fine structures that look like the brain. And we'll talk about corals, and we'll talk about how corals can be enhanced, how they can be protected, how they're threatened. This is my favorite substitute for a coral polyp. Each coral is made up of tens of thousands, sometimes millions, of tiny little coral polyps. And these coral polyps exist in concert with the whole coral itself. They build it piece by piece. The stony corals have a secreted little skeleton around each polyp. And those polyps have symbiotic algae in them that photosynthesize, giving them some energy and some color. When the corals are alive, the polyps usually in by day, out by night to feed. There are some exceptions. And in Bonaire right now, they're reproducing abundantly during October. So we're looking at our reefs regenerating themselves piece by piece, larvae by larvae. Interesting, when these corals are alive and open like this, they can feed, they can respire, they can excrete, and they can reproduce. But if they're touched by divers equipment, fingers, fins, if they're touched by particles that are stirred up, if they're disturbed by pollutants, they will close up. And when they close up, they look like that. And when they're closed up, they cannot feed, they cannot excrete, they cannot respire, nor can they reproduce. So it's critical that corals are well managed, well protected around the world. And we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about some of the dynamic new work being done in coral aquaculture, helping to sustain coral reefs that need help, that have been damaged by storms, that have been damaged by pollution, have been damaged by global climate change, where corals that are more resistant to climate conditions are being grown in places like Summerland Key with plantamillion corals with Dr. David Vaughn, my colleague. So we'll talk about that during the course. We'll talk about a lot of things. And we'll use as our text a wonderful book, Marine Biology by Castor and Huber, and it's 12th edition now. And that book has a comprehensive set of discussions and chapters that are very well written about the world's oceans. And those chapters have an abundant number of images, of charts, of graphs, and case studies that help expand your repertoire of understanding of what's being discussed. We also will have, I hope, very active in-class discussions. I want students to be involved. If you happen to be in Australia and can't join us every night, that's okay. You can go online and work with our Yellow Dig program or communicate directly with me or with other students. We want people discussing about the oceans, about what we've talked about. But I also want people to ask questions, lots of questions. I can't provide all the information in lectures and films and presentations, and I'll have a mix of all three. But I also can't answer every question. We can sometimes find answers together if we haven't got the answers. There's some questions to which we have not yet got the answers, but there are things that we do have the answers for. We know, for instance, that corals are held together on the reef in large part because of coralline algae. And this is a reddish, relative to the seaweeds, algae, that encrusts, so like if you didn't brush your teeth for a whole month. And so this encrustation helps the corals be held together. We find it washed up when we find corals washed up because there's been damage to the reef. You usually don't see these because they're in between the corals. So we'll talk about those and other things that help to make the city of coral, the coral reefs, what they are. But beyond the coral reefs, we'll look at things like the new green-blue economy, seaweeds and algae, which have fed people around the world for millennia and now are being aquacultured intensively. We'll talk about fish and their role in helping to feed the world. And so we'll then talk about everything from the shorelines, the coastal waters, all the way down to the deep sea. and everything in between. We'll talk a fair bit about New England's fisheries and its whales. We have one of the most beautiful, large, spectacular, but most endangered species of marine mammals on Earth, the right whale. We'll also talk about our fisheries, rich from the top to the bottom and in the bottom. And then we'll go around the world and look at places like the Philippines, where these cone snails are harvested. And it turns out, in part of marine pharmacology work, and done by Alvaro Baldamari, that they found that the toxin that the snail uses, sticking out its snout with a little tooth-like, sharp, arrow-shaped radula tooth, that they can inject a neurotoxin. Could kill people even. They use it on prey. It's way over-designed. But they're now using that neurotoxin in a weakened state as a non-addictive pain control. And so we find around the world there's great potential for marine pharmacology. So the blue economy, as we look at it, has multiple facets to it, from fisheries to seaweeds to energy to minerals, which are a great concern, to mollusks. And so we'll look at that. The horseshoe crab that I've worked on, I will talk about in class. When I met it, had a bounty on it. To this day, it's saving thousands of lives every day because its blood, which it can now donate, they don't have to be killed for it, their blood is used as the #1 test for pyrogenes and endotoxins. Hopefully, there's a good substitute that's being looked at. Some places have approved it, a lot haven't, because the gold standard is this LAL, Limulus amoebocytic lysate, that we'll talk about. We'll also look a little bit at the culture of the oceans. These little money cowries from the Philippine Islands, besides being used in stews and for food, like periwinkles have been around the world, for 500 years, the money cowrie was the global unit of currency. 13, 14, 15, 16, 1700s, these were traded back and forth. Kenya has a 20 cedis coin representing the string of 20 of these that will be traded. Interestingly, these shiny snails are naturally shiny because the animal covers the shell. And so we'll talk about that. It was these, not Bitcoin, by the way, that was that first global currency. So in our course, we'll span the globe and span the topics, looking at the role of mangroves, looking at the role of shallow waters and salt marshes and bays. And then we'll go into the shallow coastal waters, all the way down to the edge of the continental shelf. And then we'll dive down that into the deep sea. And there is a great concern there that we'll talk about, the mining, potentially starting this summer and fall, of the Clipperton zone in the Pacific to mine the manganese nodules and others to contain all the minerals needed for all the electric batteries that we'll need going forward. And that's a great danger to the deep sea, about which we know less than the surface of the moon. So I hope that you will join me and fellow students in helping us investigate this wonderful, wonderful blue planet, as Sylvia Earle called it, and look at this wonderful planet ocean that Jacques Cousteau saw in the first satellite photograph and called us the blue marble in space. There's a lot to talk about, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot of solutions that we need to keep this planet ocean going into the millennia. So, thank you all, and I hope to see you in the spring course.